Welcome back to Turn Down for What. We appreciate you tuning back in as we continue our conversation with Chris Kaiser. Like and subscribe for more EV news and content. Let's dive on in.
When you're doing these projects, are you do you have any kind of locked in rate for a period of time so you can really project what the ROI is, or is it subject to rate increases just like my home utility is?
Yeah, so I say that so like for let's see, so Georgia Power and TV, they're regulated entities, and where the answer might get vague is I'm not sure on deregulated um, how far you can lock in rates, but from like a regulated entity, you're just kind of at the whims of rate increases and integrated resource planning and what the Public Utility Commission is going to approve. So the big deal in Georgia right now is the two new nuclear reactors that were built. They're, pick my words wisely. It's debatable whether the cost controls were adequate that were put in place, and it's there's some questions around how much burden the ratepayers should bear if the cost controls were not adequate. Long story short is our electricity costs have gone up considerably, basically because of the cost overruns associated with new nuclear power plants.
Now, is that
And
something
that's,
that? No, go ahead.
I was going to say, time that all back in, like if you were to have a model for public VC fast charging, which assumed much lower rates, that model may start to break as the rates increase. And you could say, oh, we'll just pass it on to the consumer, right? Because that's what you see a lot is, well, we can just, if we're looking at Massachusetts, and we are, and my big concern there is like rates are so much higher than other parts of the country, similar to California. There comes a point though where you can't simply just pass it on to consumers because they will either charge at home or find free chargers or whatever. I follow a lot of the forums on EV charging on Facebook or whatnot, and a lot of them will say, oh, charging shouldn't be above 40 cents a kilowatt hour. And my argument is always like, well, in a lot of cases, it has to be if you want the charging companies to make a profit. Because if 40
I
cents a
mean,
kilowatt hour is
Chris, you get
saving,
you get charged 45 cents at your house for power.
Yeah, it's so California is so crazy, and I'm fascinated by how this power thing works. That's why I was asking if something was locked in long term, because here with PG&E, which is the predominant one here in Northern California, they have rate increased twice in the past year and have a proposed rate increase for this July. And the rates have, I mean, it's gone astronomically higher, even with special EV rates.
yeah,
And then they kind of mess with you. Like, so yeah, I can do a lower EV rate overnight, but then they jack my peak pricing to like 70 cents a kilowatt. So when I'm
that's
cooking
right.
with my oven and I got my air conditioner on, I mean, they're gonna get your money either way.
Yeah, I think those EV rates are, I think if people really did a cost benefit analysis on those residential EVs, they realize they're not a good deal, because if you look at the total energy in your house is primarily driven, at least where we're all living, by your heating and air conditioning
Yep.
system.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, you might get lower rate in the middle of the night, but when you're using your AC in the middle of the day, you're going to pay double, and so your total bill is going to go up. And so, all this is a relevant conversation because, the energy cost is just, it's an important aspect, but it's just one aspect of trying to operate profitable EV charging stations.
What's
And it's not in our control at all unless we build a microgrid. But then oftentimes the cost to do that is going to bring the system to be economical. So, yeah, these are all challenges and all things that companies need to be considering and looking at for sure.
I mean, kind of at a different level. When I was looking at a power wall for my house, there was a Stanford study that talked about it had about a 10-year break even, and the warranty on the battery is 10 years. So, of course, it
Yeah.
will last longer than that. But there's not really a great argument at the time to be made, especially out here, because I had one for one net metering. But since subsequent to that, because they've changed the net metering rules, all of it now the battery is a more financially beneficial ROI because
That's right.
the way that they're doing that. And the thing people always think about with batteries, some people, when they magically think I'm going to store this energy in the battery, then I'm going to get it back, and it's a one for one swap. But it's more like a 90% swap. You're gonna lose
Yeah.
something in converting it from AC to DC and then DC back to AC again. And you got to factor that in. So your rates have to have a delta big enough to make that make sense. And then when you're talking industrial batteries, that's its own thing. And then interestingly, Tesla, who is its own beast, and that kind of is what led me to the question about our rates locked in sometimes, because in my case, I recently had my what's called my true up statement once a year, and I owed PG&E like $210, which is nothing. That's for my truck, for my house, everything. But I'm petty, and I don't want to pay PG&E a dime. Like, I would rather
Yeah.
pay you $210, even if I don't
Right.
save anything, than pay it to PG&E, because that's just how I feel about them. And so with the Ford adapters coming into play, and I started charging on the Tesla network and bought their month-long package. And when I start looking at the stations, there's one nearest to me, and to your point, the rates are higher near me than it is nearer to my work. So there is a location nearer to my work,
Oh yeah.
which in the afternoon is 25 cents a kilowatt, and I don't know how they're doing it. I can't comprehend what they're doing there, because you cannot
Because their
buy.
costs are probably higher.
Well, no, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. That's cheap for California. Yeah. So normally you're looking
Yeah.
at
Right.
40 to 60 cents, 45 to 60 cents a kilowatt. Um, but out of this one spot, kind of near where my work is, it's in the afternoon. It's only 25 cents, and Tesla typically at 11 o'clock at night lowers it to 23,
Yeah.
25 cents right there. But this one does it in the afternoon. And I don't know how they're doing it, but the point being that for me, it's cheaper for me to pick maybe 2 months a year where I do all my EV charging off Tesla's network, and I will save money and not
Yeah.
not go over. And it makes sense to do it that way. But I have looked at all the sites, and I strategically pick which one I charge at based on that rate.
Well, and that goes back to what I said, is like, you don't know how they're doing it, but you're assuming that they're making a profit, and they may be taking a loss during that time period, because they have other drivers,
But I think some
financial motivation.
companies, I think what we've identified, and I don't know the exact science, but I think some companies get subsidized through specific incentives to larger
Well,
corporations for um, power and EV related things, and so that
it
allows cheaper power.
brings up a good point. They're probably getting LCFS credits.
What are
So
those?
the state of California pays low carbon fuel standard
Mm,
credits.
yep.
Um, and EV charging qualifies. Like, I did a revisit to LCFS, I don't know, 3 months ago, and it was interesting because the people getting the most credit were people who were importing biogas made in Louisiana or something like that. So there's all these like financial, stuff going on in the background, but you as a resident, I don't think you're getting LCFS credits, but Tesla charging electric vehicles does get a credit from the state. It's the, I think, California Air Resources Board that issues those. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of different angles, or motivations that may be going on, or Tesla's just like, hey, we're going to take a loss on our entire charging network, but it's aiding and selling our vehicles, so we're going to do it. So yeah,
Yeah,
challenging.
California is a weird beast, because we don't get carbon credits, for example, for my home solar, but there's other places in the country where you can sell that.
Yeah.
And then Tesla will give you, when they sell you solar, they will give you a certain amount of money for your carbon credits, but then they own those credits for in
Yeah.
perpetuity. And then California also has these things that twice a year, legislatively, we get some type of carbon credit kickback to us on our power bill twice a year. It's like $140, $150 credit back to us. So it is really complex, and it's to try to navigate all of it is it's got to be incredibly difficult. And I'm sure that if you blink and turn away from it for 50 seconds, you're gonna miss 3 new laws that
Yeah.
have passed. Like, how do you keep up with the changes? Are there there are departments that you have to keep up with all these, or you just have to
I
get on a
I think on our end, I mean, you see the diversity between Tennessee and California as a prime example of some of the growth pains that are going to happen between low adoption and higher adoption. Because one of the biggest things that we've looked at is right now EV adoption nationwide is pretty low. It's
right.
it's increasing and growing, but if you get to the point that 30 to 50% of all vehicles on the road turn into EV, you're going to have a headache. I mean, I think in California, the number is, it's a good chunk. I don't know the exact number as of today, but it's a good chunk of vehicles are EVs, and there's already, you know, power issues as it sits. And so, I mean, you're seeing in our world, it would never be cheaper to charge at a public charger than at my house, but that's because we're not there yet. Because power, we still have power demand issues, but they're not pivoting that onto the EV driver. It is pivoted to you know, just generalized use case for residential across the board with an influx of population. But that's something that in your instance, it kind of showcases some of the uniqueness of, one, the need for standardization, because across the board, there's going to be a very uneven experience from district to district. You know, nationwide, gas prices fluctuate, but there's a general experience across the board, because usually it's all being imported from similar sources. But with EV driving, you're going to see all up and down the space. I can go to an electrify. This was my experience. There was an Electrify America that I got, literally, like, I don't understand even with incentives how they did it. I filled my entire truck. It was like $4, and the exact same amount of charge from a Pilot 1 mile down the road that I stopped out on the way back was $40. And it's going to matter, EV prices, when it comes to mass adoption, because that's a massive difference in experience. And although they have a Cinnabon at the Pilot, I would much rather save the $36 and walk into Walmart and grab a bag of chips. But that's something that, you know, across the board, there's going to need to be, I think, some standardization and some uniformity and rate schedules across at least power co-ops. And it's going to be an interesting thing to see how that all develops as adoption increases.
Well, and steering back to what you do, Chris, on the overall side of this is, especially with level 2, is to this point, NEVI really hasn't played a role in level 2 rollouts. That's probably going to come over the next few years, at least the next 2 years, as these states get their second round and third round in place. There will be funds available that's unlocked for the NEVI program. For the people that are listening that have a apartment complex, or they have systems like that, do you see a positive ROI, especially in lot now? You know, if you told me how much is it going to cost to install a, you know, level 2 charger, you can go as high as $10,000 for a level 2 that produces, you know, the same thing that a level 2 at my house will do for $1,500. So especially with Tesla now talking about their system and how that's going to be, you know, under $1,000, do you think the time now is looking at trying to get some of these cheaper systems and more of them? And is that the trend that you currently see going on in the nation?
Yeah, so we've mentioned Tesla a couple times, and I'm familiar with and we're looking to work with them from an installation partner point of view on their new universal wall charger. So that's the don't go order a wall charger and expect you're getting the universal wall charger. So the wall charger is one product, the universal wall charger is a different product. I made that mistake and I got shipped the wrong one. But the universal is great because it has both the J1772 and the Tesla NACS connector built into the same unit. So people don't need to worry about adapters.
And it can load share, which is great.
And it can load. So that lawn care company, he's actually ordering the hardware, but he's ordering the universal wall connector.
Yep.
And it's perfect because, I mean, this is a great application, right? Because we're constrained by 90 amps feeding the distribution panel. We're going to run one, 60 amp. It's a 60 amp breaker. We're going to run one service, and we can daisy chain units. So we run power to the first unit, and then you can daisy chain up to, I think, 4 units. And so that's just to reduce the wiring cost. So we don't need conduit. We only need one run of wire, from the main unit back, one home run versus 4 home runs. And we can power share. And he's fine with power sharing because, the trucks get back at 6 p.m. and they don't go out again until 8 a.m. And he only uses 50% of the battery because they only have like a 10-mile radius that they operate under. And so he's like, yeah, if I'm only, the power sharing is perfect. And so that's what we're going to try. And so I think different companies say they have those same solutions, but trying to get that tech support, in my experience, has been harder than hopefully what Tesla's going to be able to provide. I mean, I know that I know that the guys in the Southeast, it was actually this lawn care company was a lead from them, and so I know the guys to call if there are issues, and I'll get them out of the site because I'll pester them enough. But you know, the point being is like he's only paying the cost of the charger, which I think that Universal, I think you can go online, it's what, $650 or whatever,
Yeah, it's
and
about
that
that.
includes the power sharing and the software. Everything's included. You know, you don't have a separate software fee that almost every other charging manufacturer is going to charge for some of those added features.
And I assume
So
the electrical rates out there are they're probably not as high as they are here in California, because like you wouldn't
yeah,
want to.
he might be paying 15 cents
Wow.
a kilowatt hour,
Okay.
and that's because it's blended. Whereas in fast charging, you're actually paying closer to 20 cents a kilowatt hour in Georgia Power if that's the only thing on the meter because of this whole demand charge and
Yep.
stuff like that. So, but you know, to answer your question, Jesse, is that not just the hardware and the software aspect, but Tesla will actually own the chargers in some instances. So if it's a apartment complex in a metro area and they think there's going to be a lot of EV drivers at that apartment complex, they will foot the cost of the install up to they have a ceiling where they say, hey, this is the max we're going to pay to get these installed, because they're doing that to try to make a profit off the chargers. So it's hard to compete with that, especially when they have the best reputation for charging in the industry. So we at Sona said, all right, if we don't want to compete with them if we can't offer a better solution on the level 2. So that's why we said, hey, maybe we can just help them on the installation side. So I've referred customers. So I've gotten leads, and I said, look, let's check in with Tesla first, because I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time and effort and then you find them and then go with them anyway. So it's figuring out how to collaborate and all work together. And if I can't offer the best solution, I want to work with the company or whoever is offering the best solution.
Now, one other
Abs-
thing you're mentioning there that I've thought of in the past, especially talking to some of our industrial groups, is, kind of like the person you're talking to that has a fleet of trucks. Maybe they got 15 trucks. By having the opportunity for bidirectional charging, just like what the Cybertruck and some of the others have, and this would also go into like industrial tow motors. So if you have a tow, a lift truck or something in your warehouse and you got 20 of them that are charging, is there a market in the future, say on a Saturday and Sunday when it's extremely hot, like what happened in Texas this year, where per megawatt was unbelievably high, that you could sell a good portion of your power? Is that technology getting to the point? And I believe this goes into the virtual power plant systems that we're also trying to develop. But do you see a market in that in areas to kind of stabilize the grid? And is there a potential profit on that for industries that have that capability?
Is that so vehicle to grid applications?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, to where,
Yeah.
say it's 96 degrees on Saturday and your company is not working, but all your tow motors are sitting there charged up. That's about 2.5 megawatts of power. You can then trickle charge that back to the grid at that point and
Yeah.
make a good profit on that and then charge it that night.
I've seen a lot of people talk about that application. I haven't seen the pro forma that they say, okay, here's how we're physically going to do that, because that requires the utility, that requires you entering in the utility agreement that they're going to track and monitor and value what that energy is worth. And so that needs to be in place. And then all the equipment has to be in place to enable that, right? So I've done some research and some posts on LinkedIn about like when Ford announced their vehicle to home system and what that's really going to cost. And one of the questions was like, what's the ceiling? What's the most you'd be willing to pay for the system? And it was around $8,000. Then most people said, well, guess what? It's probably cost more than $8,000 for the hardware and the installation of that hardware for the vehicle to power your home, because you need transfer switches and all this other stuff. So I think a lot of my views on a lot of this stuff is, going back to microgrids or batteries, like, yeah, it sounds good in theory, but it has to make financial sense. And until I see some actual data on here's how much we spent, here's how much it made us, it's X year ROI or it's X% IRR. Until I see that and believe that, I'm going to be really skeptical, because I think whether it's microgrid or vehicle to grid or wireless charging, it's like, yeah, it all sounds great in theory, but show me the numbers. So I think that kind of stuff is a lot more challenging to actually implement and get to work and get to be profitable. And I think the first applications that will do that are the ones that, I don't know, they'll have to be like a utility pilot project or something that's going to fund that effort. Because I don't see the private industry leading the way on some of that stuff, just because it's so complicated to actually make work. And going back to Chris, you mentioned California net metering and the rules that changed around that, where the value that the utility is going to pay for solar you put back has gone down drastically. And in Georgia, it's the same thing, where you might get charged 13 cents a kilowatt hour, but the utility is only going to buy power back from you at 2 cents a kilowatt hour. And so it's really tricky. And I think the same thing will probably happen with vehicle to grid, that people are like, oh, well, I buy it at 15 cents a kilowatt hour, I'm going to sell it back to them at 15 cents a kilowatt hour. It's like, no, it's not going to work like that. So yeah, there's a lot of challenges, and I think more so than being on the utilities to fix these, it's going to have to be on the public utility commissions that have to figure out how they're going to regulate the utilities, because really the utilities are going to do what's best for their investors. And we're talking, when I say utilities, I mean investor-owned utilities for the most part. Like the ratepayers aren't their true people they're trying to make happy. I mean, it is, but it's their investors that they're trying to make happy, right? So if they're, Southern Companies, publicly traded company, they're trying to make the most profit. Anything that's going to erode that profit is not in the best interest of them as a company. So it's really up to the regulators to stay up to speed on this stuff, and they have their challenge cut out for them, because it's not just EVs, but it's electrification in general. So getting rid of just fossil fuels and heating and cooking, and then stuff like I was reading an article before this, so 6 months ago, or sorry, a year and a half ago, is cryptocurrency mining and how much electricity that was using, and now it's AI and how much electricity the data centers running AI are using. So across the board, you have all these drivers of electricity, and we have year-long lead times on transformers now, and everyone's like, oh, well, when's that going to get fixed? And I'm like, well, I don't see it getting fixed, because you have all these demand drivers going up. I was in preparation for this, I was reading the report about Georgia Power. In 2022, they submitted an integrated resource plan that expected like 400 megawatts of load growth by 2030. And then they just came back last year, and in 2023, and said, oh, we were actually wrong. We were off by a factor of 17. It's not 400 megawatts, it's 6.6 gigawatts.
Wow.
And a lot of that was due to a lot of the industrial projects coming in, but it's like that's a big miss in a year. And yes, we had these industrial projects announced, but it wasn't that many. There's a lot of stuff happening right now. So I think the old way of managing electricity grid that worked for like the past 100 years, we're gonna have to really rethink how we're gonna change with the times, because one thing utilities are notorious for is not changing, right? Like for the most part, the grid has operated the same way as whatever Thomas Edison came up with. And so we're really have to think outside the box and use a lot of these technologies. But to sum it up, like it has to make economic sense for everyone, or else it's just not going to work.
I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, Jesse came out of the data center industry, so I mean, he knows very well the power consumption that comes around to that, and that's something that, I mean, a lot of people think, oh, well, I can use Chat GPT to real quickly pull out a function for me, but they don't understand the compute that it takes to execute on those type of functions with AI and some of those technologies. And we're in such a technologically driven world that it's never going to get less. I mean, we're we're needing way more power than we're producing. And Tennessee for the longest time could utilize the dams, the dam network, to supply hydroelectric, for our residents. But there's a huge influx of residents. There's jobs coming in. There's
Yeah.
industrial developments, and there's been the push to eliminate coal power production,
Yeah.
and so that's something that there's a power crisis that we're dealing with, and solar is a means to an end. And so these nuclear, modular nuclear reactors are coming out, and there's options, but there's definitely the need for energy efficiency, which is obviously something
Yeah.
that you're looking at to conserve and make the best use of the power in the currently available spaces. But then secondarily, there's got to be addressing of grid, because it's like we've been saying, between the crypto type mining, data centers, industrial developments, we're never gonna end up with less power consumption.
Yeah.
Yeah, on
No.
the data side, it's been cool because every time, if somebody uses Chat GTP, for example, there was a couple articles out, the amount of power that it uses every time you ask, or between 5 to 50 questions that you ask it, is enough power to charge your phone from it fully empty
Yeah.
to full. That's how much power, and it uses about, I think it's like a half a liter of water, which is a pretty good amount of water that you just use every time
Yeah.
you ask a question. And there's a lot of work that has to go into creating that. And so, definitely power, if that's the issue, we're going to have to figure out ways to make it work.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I didn't like hearing that the nuclear was hitting cost overruns, because that's one of the things I think we need a heck of a lot more of. And
Yeah.
California has a ton of wind and solar, and you end up with this wicked duck curve where
Yeah.
sometimes we're exporting power for free, even paying other neighboring states to take it from us because we overproduce it, but then we don't have it later when we need it. And then you start getting to battery storage and all those expenses and problems.
Yeah.
And I've always thought it's just strange how little nuclear we have, but then that seems to also happen anytime you do one of these big government programs, whether it's nuclear or whether it's out here with the bullet train. Every time they come up with one of these ideas, cost overruns, environmental
Yeah.
studies, protests, lawsuits, and like we just can't do any. This is why we can't have nice things, because
Yeah.
we can have an
Well,
amazing world.
you get into vested interest, and then monopoly. Utilities a lot of times
Yeah,
are monopolies, and what does a monopoly want? They do not want change, right?
yeah.
And so you just have these fundamental issues that we're going to have to figure out how we get past, and incentivize the things we want, incentivize good things, and decentivize
Solutions are
bad
there.
things.
We just got to get out of the way and let them happen.
That's what I say. Like technologically, anything in energy, like it's there. The solutions are there. We just have to put the policies in place to make those
And
feasible. So
and I mean, the reality is the government's not been shy on investing lots of dollars into these type of initiatives. I feel as if it's just a matter of appropriately allocating the justification for what needs to happen with those funds. I think I mentioned
yeah.
this last week on the podcast, but I mean, a lot of states are utilizing 30% of their NEVI buckets to fill in all of the corridor gaps that um the federal government dictated. The 50 miles within a mile of the interstate, 30% funds, and now they've filled in all the gaps. And then they are given 70% more of that bucket of funds that's already been allocated to the state for other corridor fills, for level 2 networks,
Mm,
but they have more money than they needed for this.
yeah.
And yet the states across the board are still saying, well, hey, look, we can do it in this gas station for cheaper. Let's do it there. And there's no consideration at all for what can we do to protect the grid with these funds, because $8 billion is a lot of money, and you can do a lot of things with $8 billion. And yet, that's been my biggest beef with the gas station model is, across the nation, we're just slapping in chargers across all the gas stations, and the power crisis isn't being solved, whether that's through microgrid because there's so much funding that you can get it subsidized, whether that's through some solar inputs, whether that's through grid protection, through batteries, through clean
Yeah.
energy generation, whether that's a farm, a nuclear. There's opportunities there to actually say we need to invest some funding to protect the grid, because the huge push is EVs, and I respect it. And yet there needs to be the consideration for grid protection. And so that's where, whether that's rural or urban, we have to figure out how to make more power that's not from a coal plant in West Virginia, and it's not from a solar farm that is inconsistent. Like you're saying, Chris, with wind and solar out of California, it's great to supplement, but we have to have solutions that are reliable. And that's something that there's enough funding, I think, to justify the protection of the grid in several of these moments. But that's something that the states have to have the initiative, because the funding is being pushed through the states. The states are just, saying, hey, we're going to put in 1,000 level 3 chargers, and that's cool, but that's going to do nothing other than just create a further power crisis.
Yeah.
So anyways, we're winding down on time here, so probably wrap up the conversation today. Chris, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your knowledge and expertise in the space. I'm sure we'll want to have you back on to pick your brain sometime soon. Do you have
Yeah, absolutely.
any final thoughts or insight to give us on your thoughts on the space and where it's headed?
No, I think to summarize everything, especially if speaking to potential people who work or operate commercial industrial facilities, is I think if anything, we highlighted how complicated this all can be, and you need to work with partners who can think holistically and really find solutions that solve your distinct problems and not just work. So often, and you guys probably have a similar experience. I speak with a customer and I'm like, well, who else have you spoken to? And they say, oh, I called ChargePoint and they did this. And, they just called a vendor that they were familiar with. But and this isn't I just, pick ChargePoint because they're traditionally have been one of the more well-known EV charging companies. But one thing I always stress is if you try to go through a vendor who's selling a piece of hardware, they're going to find a solution that only incorporates their hardware, where we like to advocate for manufacturer agnostic solutions. So, I know we mentioned Tesla, but it's like I've sold many other EV charging systems. It's just right now, I think Tesla has one of the more compelling offerings. So make sure you're working with solution providers that are technology agnostic, because all the issues we mentioned, we just scratched the surface on all the different challenges that you're faced with when you're trying to implement clean energy solutions. So work with people who are knowledgeable and technology agnostic and can actually deliver solutions that meet your problems, and not just solutions that incorporate their one specific product.
And if you want to know more about Chris and everything that he does, you can check out his website at sonaenergy.com.
Yep. And also I'm on LinkedIn, Chris Kaiser. You can search for me. There's maybe a couple, but I'm the bald ones.
Absolutely. The bald one. Yep. Well, I appreciate once again your time today. Really enjoyed the insight and the conversation around this ever changing topic, but something that I think will continue to evolve, because the one thing that we've realized being in this industry is that nothing is the same today as it will be tomorrow or the next day. And it's such a new industry that there's a lot of evolution happening, and we just roll with the punches as they go. So definitely something that we will continue to have dialogue about. I appreciate the time, and that's all for today.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Great talk.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. If you didn't get a chance to see part 1 of this conversation, tune in now. Like and subscribe for more episodes like this one. See you next week.